Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Daniel Ebor Challam, and I teach economics at St. Anthony's College, Shillong. Today's session is a little unusual because I'm not going to give you a list of do's and don'ts from some education theory textbook. I'm not a trained educational psychologist, but I am a teacher, one who experiments, fails, learns, and tries again. And today I'd like to share with you a few of those experiments. Today's talk is about rethinking the way that we teach economics, especially in schools and especially in the age of AI. So let's start with the elephant in the room, the problem with teaching economics today. Economics is an abstract subject. A lot of the topics that we deal with, concepts like utility, opportunity cost, diminishing returns, and externalities, they're not easily observable. It's not like the hard sciences like physics or chemistry. We don't have a lab where we can demonstrate these concepts through experiments. Instead, we have blackboards. And especially for a first-time learner, whether in school or in college, this can be overwhelming and very alienating. Students face two major challenges today. The first is the attention span challenge. Gen Z and Gen Alpha students are constantly switching between tabs, between apps, and between screens. If a concept feels too abstract, too theoretical, too difficult, students quickly tune out. Therefore, engagement becomes challenging for teachers. And the second challenge is the internet and artificial intelligence paradigm. With things like ChatGPT, YouTube, and Google, why would a student wait for us to explain a concept like diminishing returns when they can just simply get a video from online that explains things to them with videos and animations in just a simple click or two? So the question is, have teachers become obsolete? I would say no, not all, but teaching methods must evolve. So who am I and why this talk? So I'm not an educational psychologist. I don't hold a degree in education. But I've learned from various life experiences, from my time studying in Delhi, from my extensive classroom teaching experiences, from numerous faculty development programs that I've had to attend, and also from preparation in different entrance exams and competitive exams like NET. So what do I bring to the table? I bring my experience. I teach economics at the college level. I teach mainly undergrads, but they struggle with the same concepts that even school students do. The strategies that I will be presenting to you today are simple, they are scalable, adaptable, relevant, and surprisingly powerful. They're not just about making lessons fun, but making lessons stick. So before we go forward, I would like to highlight a quote that has guided me throughout my teaching career. This was once given to me by a teacher of mine who is now a senior colleague, Dr. B.R. Aim, who is an associate professor at Lady Keane College at the Department of Economics. So this is what he said, I'm paraphrasing of course. Never design your class for the above average student. They'll do well with or without you. Your real challenge is the weakest student. This has guided my classroom philosophy ever since. If the weakest student understands me, then I know the rest of the class will. And this has changed how I teach. So how do we do this? We need to rethink the traditional lesson. We can do this through a set of interlocking strategies designed to engage curiosity, to connect abstract concepts with the real world, and to stimulate thought and discussion. So here are some methods that I've used to strengthen the traditional lesson format. So these are examples, analogies, comparisons, real-world connections, and embedded activities. So I'll go over them one by one. Let's start with examples. So my strategy for using examples is to anchor abstract ideas in familiar, real-world, everyday, observable phenomena. For example, opportunity cost. Rather than presenting opportunity cost as some mathematical illustration or as some diagram, why not use an example like this? Having to choose between attending your friend's birthday party or studying for a test the night before. Rather than illustrating what the opportunity cost here is, you can use this example and you ask the students, what is the opportunity cost of attending your friend's birthday? The answer would be to study for the test. And likewise, what is the opportunity cost of studying for the test the night before? It would be missing your friend's birthday party. Then next we come to analogies, and the strategy here is using metaphors and simplifying abstract ideas in order to help students internalize them. The example concept that I've used here is inflation. So we know that inflation, theoretically, it leads to a worsening of purchasing power. You speak the sentence out loud, students get confused, they may not understand it immediately. So okay, you try to simplify it with an example. You say something like this, that if your pocket money increases from rupees 300 to rupees 600, but at the same time prices at the canteen also go up, then technically your money has not gained any purchasing power because you're not able to buy more snacks. Because just as much as your pocket money has increased, the prices at the canteen have also increased. So okay, this example may not stick immediately, which is where you bring in an analogy. So you compare inflation to adding more water into soup. Sure, you may have more liquid, you can feed more people, but there's also lesser flavor per bite. Then next, we have comparisons. So the strategy here is to use side-by-side scenarios to highlight key distinctions. It's especially useful when you're trying to teach two or more concepts simultaneously. So you present them side by side. For example, when you want to teach the concepts of perfect competition and monopoly, rather than teaching them in isolation, why not do a comparative study? And again, this is where you employ examples and analogies. You use things around students. So for example, buying tomatoes from Yodo, where many sellers offer the same product, which is the tomato, but for different prices. If one seller charges more, you simply go to another seller. This is a good example of perfect competition. But what about monopoly? So you use the example of a college canteen or a school canteen. There may be only one canteen in a school, and students have no other choice but to buy food from that canteen. And therefore, whatever the price the canteen charges, students have to settle for that price. Either that or they go without food. So this is an example of a monopoly. Then we have real-world connections. So the strategy around real-world connections involves applying a classroom theory to the real world, to a lived environment or to a current event. You use things around students. So for example, when you're tackling the concept of externalities, the simple explanation is when one person's actions affect another third party that may not be party to the first person's actions, with or without getting paid for it. Again, a loaded statement, but you can simplify it by using examples like this. Garbage burning or flowers on a doorstep. When your neighbor burns garbage and the smell enters your house, that is an example of a negative externality because the neighbor burning garbage is not engaged in a transaction with you, but yet you still suffer and your neighbor doesn't have to pay for your suffering. Or on the other side, we have a positive externality, like flowers on a doorstep. Your friend plants flowers in front of her house and everyone enjoys the view. This is a positive externality because everyone enjoys. They benefit from having these flowers growing on the doorstep. But again, people enjoying the view of the flowers do not engage in a transaction with the person who's actually planted the flowers. But yet everyone benefits with or without payment. Then finally, we come to embedded activities. Rather than giving students standard home assignments, give them activities that let them live and breathe economics. Help students do economics, not just hear it. So this especially works with topics like statistics, data collection, and graphing. What you can do is you can ask students to collect data on simple things like phone usage, sleep hours, or the marks in the last test. Collect all the answers on the blackboard, and you graph these results. You draw a bar graph. This way you get to demonstrate concepts like a frequency histogram without having to actually rely on students doing it at home. You turn it into a classroom activity where both you, the teacher, and the students engage in a one-on-one discussion. Now, why do these tools work? Now, these 5 tools help to create engagement, ownership, and meaning. Students understand better when they see themselves in the concept. They become familiar with topics that were once considered abstract or theoretical, and this familiarity helps reduce anxiety. Analogies and stories help make these lessons stick. And activities like the embedded activity, they engage both the mind and hands. Topics that were once considered abstract or even scary now become more familiar and simpler to understand for the student, easier to digest. Now, another method that I've employed beyond the traditional lecture or traditional lesson format is flipping the classroom, but not in the conventional sense. Normally, when we talk of flipping the classroom, we provide material to the students to go through beforehand at home. And when they come back to school, they discuss the material amongst themselves, maybe in a seminar format. But in my version of flipping the classroom, yes, I provide students the material to learn at home. And what they do is they prepare a lecture, they prepare slides, and they come teach it in class. So instead of the teacher now explaining, students take charge of the teaching. The teacher now becomes a listener, a facilitator, and an evaluator. So again, this is how I flip my classroom. Students now become teachers for a day. I assign a simple topic or a concept before time. I give the students enough time, maybe up to a week to prepare, and the student prepares a short explanation or slides. They use examples or games if they want. And they teach not just me, but their peers, while I sit at the back of the classroom and I watch like a student. And afterward, I offer constructive feedback. I ask a few clarifying questions, and I also use this as an opportunity to assess them. I use this as an opportunity to give them internal assessment. So now, why does this work? Because explaining is the best way to understand. When students explain, they sometimes even bring better examples than we do. And of course, we have peer learning. Students understand better when it's their friends who explain it to them. And this also helps to build confidence, public speaking, and critical thinking. And these are skills that go way beyond the subject of economics. The next method that I've employed are student presentations, what I also like to call learning by doing. It's an extension of the flipped classroom. So now, rather than presenting material from the syllabus, I allow students to present an original idea. That is, I turn students into mini researchers. So this not only builds communication skills, confidence, but also real-world experience, real-world relevance. So as I said, I turn students into researchers. And the best example for this, again, is in a topic like statistics. What I do is I ask the students, again, to collect data from their peers. Example, data on height, on weight, hours of sleep, number of packets of chips eaten in a week. Basically, data which can be easily collected. Students don't have to go out of their way to get this data. Now, instead of me demonstrating how to analyze this data, the students do it themselves. They organize and clean the data. Then they apply the statistical tools that they've learned from a class. Topics like mean, median, mode, range, and standard deviation, frequency tables and graphs like bar graphs, pie graphs, histograms. And at the most, they may even perform a simple correlation. And what they do is they present their findings. Once again, they present their findings not just to me, but also to their peers. I sit at the back of the class and pretend like I'm a student. Now, why does this approach work? Because now students get to internalize all these abstract mathematical concepts that they see on paper. Topics like mean and distribution. So rather than working with Greek symbols or letters or numbers, they get to actually generate the numbers themselves. They get to work and process with the numbers, and they own the entire learning process. They get to decide what tools to use and why. They have to explain why they've used a particular tool. And all this they get to do voluntarily. So this is also a great stepping stone because it prepares them for the real world. Prepares them for a career maybe in survey work, in field studies, or even in their internships. Then the next topic that I've employed is classroom experiments. In other words, allowing economic concepts to come alive. So this is slightly different from the previous two methods which rely on flipping the classroom. This is a method that enables students to live and breathe economics. I sometimes like to call it lab in the classroom experiments because it tries to emulate the hard sciences. The hard sciences have labs to work in. In economics, we don't. But this is the best or the closest alternative to recreating a lab in the classroom. So what I've done in the class is I've introduced an experiment. It's called the paper plane challenge. And I use this to teach the topic of diminishing returns, or what we sometimes call the law of variable proportions. So what do I do is I allow students to form teams in increasing size. So maybe we start out with a team of 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10. Depends on how many students are participating. And I give them fixed inputs. So I give them one sketch pen and one work table. No matter what the size of the team is, whether it's a team of 1 or a team of 10, they are all assigned one table to work on and one sketch pen. And the activity is to make as many paper planes as they can within 1 minute. And it's not enough that they make the paper planes, but they also have to fly the paper plane. They have to demonstrate that the paper plane actually works. And over and above that, they also have to mark these paper planes using the sketch pen that's been given to them with their team name. Now, obviously, what they see is that output increases, and then it stagnates, and then it falls as team size increases. This is something that we know that the law of diminishing returns tells us. Although you see it on paper, yes, you see it on a graph, but now they get to live the experience. They get to see how the law of diminishing returns works in reality. And it also helps that we can demonstrate the data that they've generated through this experiment with the help of a graph. And as you can see, you get the famous inverted U-shaped graph that is normally associated with the law of diminishing returns. So literally now, this concept is something that flies in the air. It's not something that is limited to just paper or a drawing. Now, why do classroom experiments work? Because firstly, these activities transform the classroom into a lab. The abstract becomes concrete. Students once again generate the data themselves. They're not just looking at random numbers in a textbook. They get to own the learning. They own the entire process, in fact, starting from data generation to analysis to learning. It encourages teamwork, critical thinking, and analysis. It also adds energy and excitement. Students now don't just hear about economics anymore. They get to do it. And it's a perfect way to introduce them to generating graphs, tables, and even abstract exam questions. Then the next method we come across is demonstrations. So this is teacher-centric. It involves showing and not just solving. Now, sometimes not all concepts need to be hands-on games, like the experiment I just talked about previously. Some of these may be better handled through visualization. So you can use tools like Excel or Google Sheets to demonstrate statistical concepts like averages, graphs, or correlations. Show the students the functions, let them play with the data. So for example, again, this works best with topics in statistics, like measures of central tendency, graphs, and correlation. You input raw data, for example, heights of 10 students in centimeters, and then you demonstrate to students how to find the average. Maybe you can do it by using built-in functions like the average function, the median function, or mode, or you let them do it by hand. By hand as in not on paper, but they generate the sum themselves. They use the sum function, and then they divide the sum by the total number of observations. So they use a formula like equals to sum of range divided by n. So with this, they can also generate graphs. They get to visualize frequencies, categories, etc. They can show correlation also. All these topics which may take a lot of time to do on paper, they can simply do it on Excel. Now, why do demonstrations work? So firstly, they save time. There's no need to spend 15 minutes on doing long divisions on the blackboard or on paper. It improves clarity because visual learning helps visual learners grasp concepts faster when they see graphs, color coding, or real-time output. It helps to bridge the gap between theory and practice. And basically, it helps to make the subject feel practical rather than abstract. It's a great bridge between what you learn in school and also what you end up demonstrating in the professional world. It encourages self-learning. Now we come to assessment. Here's the big question. If AI can write perfect answers, should we still test students by giving them homework and assignments? So the answer is no, at least with regards to homework and home assignments. Instead, we should test for knowledge that or skills that AI may not be able to of questioning should not remain static. So for example, instead of asking old-style questions such as explain the law of diminishing returns with examples, here in such questions, students will just simply Google, copy the answer and submit. In fact, now they won't even Google, they'll probably use ChatGPT or any other AI chatbot to generate the answer, copy that and submit. So rather than doing this, we can move from a descriptive question such as this one to a diagnostic question. Instead of asking directly about the law of diminishing returns, we redesign the question as follows. 5 of your friends join you in a small kitchen meant to occupy 1 person to help you make Maggie. What happens to output? Is this consistent with the law of diminishing returns? Why or why not? Now, no AI can answer this question without contextual thinking. Such questions require application rather than memory. Then apart from this, we also need to come to terms with the idea that objective questions are not necessarily easy. For the longest time, we've always assumed that objective type questions, especially MCQs, we misunderstand them as easy or surface level. But we need to move on and understand that objective questions that test memory, yes, those are simple. But we need to design application-based MCQs, questions that test conceptual clarity, logic, linkages, and decision-making under constraints. So for example, rather than simply asking about the law of diminishing marginal utility, rephrase the question like this. It is a very hot day and you drink a glass of cold water. It feels refreshing. But later that night, when it's cold and rainy, you drink your 10th glass of water, but it doesn't feel as satisfying anymore. Why? You're still testing for the same concept, which is the law of diminishing marginal utility. But you're doing it in a way that you're not testing memory, but rather you're testing a student's ability to apply what was learned in class. Then another method for assessment that I've employed is the open book method, but not an open phone. So what does this involve? So again, in the AI era, traditional closed book tests, they often test only memory, but not thinking. So my solution is open book tests. Allow students to bring any printed material they want. It can even be ChatGPT generated. They can bring borrowed books from the library, but they are not allowed to use their phones or any AI tools on the spot. So this prevents them from simply copy-pasting answers. And I allow them to work in groups. They can work individually on their own, but they can also work in groups. And therefore, group discussions become encouraged. Learning becomes collaborative. Students get to debate with each other and they learn through their peers. So now, why do open book tests work? Because firstly, you're encouraging research, whether it's online or through a book. Students now go out into the real world. They look for material from online. They look for textbooks. They look for notes and printed handouts. And they search for arguments, not just answers. Then we also get to ask what are called high-order thinking skills or HOTS-based questions. So questions are now testing application, evaluation, problem solving, and real-world linkages rather than memory. And it encourages students to work in groups to discuss, argue, and defend their ideas before writing and presenting their final answers. So here are some sample questions that I have employed in open book tests. So the first is this one. It's related to the law of diminishing returns. Given the recipe for pansde or fried potatoes, write the production function. So what I do in this question is I provide a recipe for pansde. You can take this from the internet or you can just provide a simple recipe yourself. Mention all the quantities required in the recipe. Then you ask students to write down the production function incorporating all the ingredients and their quantities. Then further you ask, what happens when you add more potatoes but you don't increase the size of the pan or the oil? You illustrate using the concept of returns to a factor. Or another question. The government has proposed building a large mall and parking complex at the PWD complex at Barrack Point instead of a public park. Assess this proposal by distinguishing between growth and development. What economic tools would you use to evaluate whether this leads to welfare enhancement or not? Now, all these questions are questions that I've used in open book tests before with my own students. They are tried and tested, and from my experience, I can tell you that they work. So now we move on to designing AI-resistant questions. I provided all the tools that I've used in class, but it's not just the tools that need to be employed, but also the questions. They need to, as I've mentioned before, they need to evolve from descriptive to diagnostic questions. So what are the principles behind designing AI-resistant questions? So firstly, you have to contextualize the questions in local culture. For example, using Pun's Day to teach production functions, or the PWD Complex Redevelopment Project to teach concepts like development and welfare. You design MCQs that require a logical chain of thought. You ask for a decision, a comparison, or a justification, or you ask students to create something, to create a graph, to create a proposal, or to create a literature review. One thing that I've tried with my students in order to encourage them to start looking for literature from online is to start searching for literature that relates to maybe the topic of production functions. I encourage them to use sources like JSTOR. And I also further tell them to quote or to cite the reference in APA format. So what this does is it gets students to go out of their way, to go beyond the textbook, to go online, to look for literature that corroborates something that they're studying, and to also cite it in an appropriate format. Now, one particular technique which I haven't employed but I plan to use in the up and coming semester is what we call AI critique assignments. So rather than using AI to generate answers simply, we use AI as a springboard, not a shortcut. Now, what this involves is giving students a simple question in advance. Again, this is a very simple example. Why do people save money? Then I allow them, I encourage them to look for an answer from online, whether it's simply through Google, or I ask them to generate a chatbot response using AI like ChatGPT or Google Gemini. And instead of submitting the response as it is, they come to class, they present the essay as it is, whatever has been generated previously, and then they analyze, critique, and deconstruct the AI's answer in class. I plan to even allow them to discuss in groups. What was good about the answer? What did it miss? Where could it have done something better? So now, why does this work? Now, this works because it encourages critical thinking. It teaches AI literacy. Students now learn how to evaluate AI-generated content and not just to blindly trust it. It respects tech-savvy learners. It also promotes discussion, not just between the teacher and students, but also between peers. And therefore, the classroom becomes a space for debate, for improvement, and for reasoning, not just evaluation. So now then, what is the teacher's role in all this, in the new age of AI and technology? So once again, I would like to bring to your attention that I am not a psychologist. Neither do I have a background in education. Whatever I have shared with you today, it is based on true events, on my personal experience. Moreover, not all the tools that I have talked about today may work for you. But anyway, more on that in a bit. What we have to talk about is your role as a teacher. So now, teachers are no longer evaluators, but they are moderators of ideas, they are facilitators of analysis, they are curators of best answers, and they are coaches in the digital age of reasoning. Okay, so now we have come to the conclusion of my talk. Before we move forward, once again, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that I'm not a psychologist, neither do I have a background in education, and whatever I've shared with you today is based on true events and on my own personal experiences. So now, what is the role of a teacher then in the day and age of AI and the internet? So teachers are no longer just evaluators. They are moderators of ideas, they are facilitators of analysis, they are curators for better answers, and they are coaches for digital age reasoning. So having said this then, I also have to acknowledge that whatever tools I have presented today, not all of them may work for you. Some might not, maybe all of them work, maybe none do. You will have to tailor your approach to your target audience. And remember, whatever tools I've presented today, they are not exhaustive. They are not perfect and they are not universal. If you are a teacher and you're wondering, how do I even begin to do all this? Then just know this, that you don't have to implement everything at once. You don't need to be an expert in tech or in teaching pedagogy. You just have to do something as simple as implementing one of these tools. Just pick one new thing. Once you start, you'll get used to these new tools and you'll find yourself more comfortable implementing more tools in your teaching and evaluation. So what can you do? You can start by swapping maybe an old question with a HOTS-based one. You can turn one class into a flipped discussion. Maybe use Excel to demonstrate a concept. Replace one test with an open book format. Give students one opportunity to teach or to critique AI. So once again, I would like to reiterate, a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. Once again, what has worked in my classroom may not work in yours. Your students may have different needs depending on their strengths, their energies, their academic backgrounds, or their family backgrounds. Therefore, teaching is something that is deeply contextual, deeply personal, and interactive. It is a craft, it is not a checklist, it is a conversation between you and your students. It must evolve just like they do. It is less about the method and more about the match between the method and the learner. So let's evolve with. Also remember, AI is not our enemy, it is our newest colleague. Thank you. This is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember, keep trying, keep tweaking, keep teaching.